this is a good way to start to learn about terrapins and how you guys can get involved. So we'll go through a little bit about what a terrapin is. We get that as a question all the time. And what our organization does and what you guys can do to help us. Okay, so question with the terrapin. What is a terrapin? Well, a terrapin is a type of turtle. So when we say the word terrapin, we also can use turtle interchangeably. However, a terrapin is a special type of turtle. But these are all different types of turtles. So these are ones that actually you might see around here. On the top left, you have a box turtle. This is really commonly found in like wooded areas. You might find them in your backyard, sometimes in grassy areas as well. And they're very colorful. They have really bright features. And they tend to have a higher shell since they aren't in the water and need to swim as much. Next one over, you have a snapping turtle. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. So this is a snapping turtle. This is the one that people are often cautioned not to go near, not to touch, because they have a very powerful bite. And they also are very prehistoric looking. They're one of the few animals that still look like their primitive selves. So if you see a snapping turtle, my advice is to not try to pick it up, obviously from the front or from the sides. If you can gently kind of scoot it over with a stick or something else, you can do that. But snapping turtles are also very important to the ecosystem. So we want to make sure that they're doing okay as well. To the bottom left, you can see this is a very common turtle also around here. It's called a red-eared slider. You will see these in a lot of ponds and lakes, and they're very colorful as well. They tend to be a little bit smaller than some of these other terrapin or other turtles, but also very popular and do get confused a lot of times with terrapins. In fact, a funny thing, in the UK, they referred to terrapins as red-eared sliders or sliders. Because there are different variations. So there's a lot of confusion in the UK about what a terrapin versus a slider is. Here, we like to distinguish a slider from a terrapin, so that they're a little bit more distinguished when we come to talking about them. And then the bottom right, you can see this is your classic sea turtle. We do have sea turtles off of the coast here. You will not see them coming up and nesting like you do down in the Gulf in the Caribbean as well. They tend to stay more out in the waters here. So, but they are around here. And sometimes people think that a terrapin is like a sea turtle and goes in the ocean, which it does not. So then all these are types of turtles, but what is actually a terrapin then versus a turtle? Well, a terrapin, like I said, is a special type of turtle that lives exclusively in brackish waters. Now, brackish waters are a mix between a salt and a fresh water. So we find these exclusively in our back bay areas, our tidal marshes, even up into the tidal rivers that we have here, like the Great Egg Harbor and the Wading River. When you get up a little further, or the Mullica River, when you get up, there is some still terrapins up in the tributaries there. They do tend to stay a little bit more where there's a better mixing of the salt and fresh water. But you can find them all the way up there. So that's what we say when we refer to terrapin, is really where they live. That's what distinguishes them from other types of turtles, which are primarily freshwater or saltwater turtles. Also, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I will address them either as we go or at the end too. So if you think of anything along the way, feel free to drop it in there. Okay, so the closest relative then to these terrapins, this is a baby terrapin on the right upper side, and this is a map turtle on the left side. So a map turtle looks pretty similar to a red-eared slider, but it's actually closely related to a terrapin over here. So if you're really into the genetics behind it, there's a lot of information about how these diverged and what types of turtles became freshwater versus saltwater. And you could take classes at Stockton, where I also teach biology if you want to learn more. So down here, this guy is a little bit confused. He's not related to a pineapple, unfortunately. But you can see there's different variations in the shells. This is also a map turtle at the bottom here, even though it looks quite different from the top one. So some of these other questions that we get a lot of are, how big do they get? So terrapins don't get nearly as big as something like a sea turtle, but they do get to about 8 to 9 inches for the females and only about 4 to 5 inches for the males. So unlike other species of just other organisms, the females are significantly bigger than the males. So the females can be almost double the size of the male. And that's a really easy way to tell if it's a female or a male. How long do they live? So they aren't like tortoises, which are land turtles essentially, which live to almost 100 years. Although terrapins can live from 25 to 30 years, which is pretty long considering. The females hit maturity around 7 years and the males around 5 years. So that's still pretty delayed until they're actually sexually mature, which is why when terrapins are injured or hurt on our roadways, it's really detrimental to the population. So how many eggs do they lay? Like other turtles, they lay eggs. They can lay anywhere between 8 to 14. But around the Margate area, we tend to see around 9 to 11. And a female can lay her eggs more than once in a season. And they can come up more than once and lay another nest, although more commonly, it's usually just one nest per season. So they nest between end of May, sometimes beginning of June, to about the middle of July. So it's a very small period of time that they're actually on land and nesting, and that's when we see them. You can see terrapins out in the marshes. You might see their heads bobbing up, or you might see them sometimes sunning on the banks when it's low tide. But for the most part, you will not see them on any type of land except for the end of May to the middle of July. And what do they eat? So terrapins have really powerful jaws, just kind of like snapping turtles. So they use these jaws to pry open different types of bivalves like mollusks and also snails. They're a really big fan of periwinkle, which is a type of snail, a salt snail. And they will actually crack open the shells and eat the snail inside. They also do eat crabs. Sometimes they'll eat other types of insects and other things that are kind of small and found along the shores of the marsh. So Diamondback Terrapin subspecies. So there's a great variety in the types of shells and the skin color of all these terrapins. There's 7 different subspecies. There's only 6 here. I didn't list our subspecies. But these are all found from Cape Cod all the way down to Texas. And they're only found in that very small zone where there's brackish waters or that salt freshwater mixing. You have ones that are very ornate. They're actually called Ornate Diamondback Terrapin. It's that middle bottom little one. You can see how lightly colored the shell is. And you also have a Mississippi one, which is this darker one on the upper right-hand side. And then you have ones that are a little bit closer to our terrapin in the upper left-hand side, which is the Carolina one. And again, these are all different subspecies, but they're all still Diamondback terrapins, which is crazy how much variety you can see in their shells. So like I was saying, where can you find them? They go all the way from Cape Cod, all the way down into the Gulf and to the end of Texas. So they have quite a big range, but that's not to be mistaken thinking that our terrapins here migrate all the way down there. Terrapins actually are very close to where they were born. They don't go very far. In fact, sometimes they won't go more than a mile or less from where they were born. So they're not migrating. They're just found in all these different areas. And in each state, depending on the populations, in some of these states, they're actually considered endangered or threatened. New Jersey, they are not listed as endangered or threatened. They're a species of special concern, which means we're looking out for them. We want to make sure that we're kind of protecting them, but we don't really know their true population size. So we just want to make sure that we're aware of them and doing what we can right now. So why are they important? So some people are like, oh, they're really cute, which is totally true. They are very cute. But we do not want them as pets. That's a big disclaimer I'll say at the end. They're not made for pets. But they're important to the ecosystem. And on this Earth Month that we're talking about, a lot of our concerns are about our ecosystem and how we impact them. So Diamondback Terrapins, they like to eat the salt marsh snails, the periwinkle, like I was talking about. And these periwinkle feed on these salt marsh grasses. And then these grasses actually stabilize all the salt marshes and the banks. Without this stabilization, what happens is all these grasses then disappear and there's nothing to root the soil in the salt marsh. And then these become salt flats and they just become these mud, gross flats that nothing can grow on. And that means that nothing else can be in there either. You can't have all the birds that usually hide out in them. You start to lose all the terrapins that were kind of nesting in there. You start to really break down the entire ecosystem. So it's something small as these little teeny snails that the terrapins are keeping in check. Not to mention terrapins, unfortunately, are also food for other animals, primarily different types of birds. Raccoons will eat them as well when they're smaller. So it's part of the food web and the web's, the circle of life, you can say, that they also provide food to other organisms. But most importantly, they keep these salt marsh snails in check, which are really tiny, but can be pretty devastating. So why did the terrapin cross the road? Why are we concerned about them crossing the road and why are they on there in the first place? So terrapins are looking for the perfect place to nest. When the females are gravid, which means that they have eggs and they want to lay their eggs, they are on a one-track mind to find the best spot to nest. And that means sometimes crossing roads without knowing that it's a road. They're looking for a nice sandy spot that's quiet, that's kind of, in the right spot where they can hide their nest, and that is the most ideal spot above the high tide line. And these are pictures at the bottom of some of the eggs and what they look like. They're pretty small. They have like a pinkish color when they're first laid, and they're very dependent on moisture and temperature as well. We were talking earlier, there is a fun fact, I think if anybody tuned into the Wetlands Institute earlier, I think it was maybe this week or a week before, eggs are what's called temperature sex dependent, which means that if the eggs are warmer, they're incubated in a warmer temperature, they'll become females. Whereas if they're cooler, they will become males. So when they are incubated in an incubator in, say, for example, at Stockton or the Wetlands Institute, we want to make them females because females are disproportionately being injured on the roadways. So we're trying to replace that population. In nature, when we have a warmer year, when it's, we have a record heat waves or other types of weather temperature phenomenon going on, we might see more females, which is also a way of, ensuring that this population continues. So, like I talked about, and terrapins are really important for our ecosystem and the environment, but there's also facing a lot of problems too and threats. So first off, this is not a picture of a terrapin shell, it's a picture of a sea turtle shell, but boating. So boating with the outboard propellers, these propellers oftentimes can hit a terrapin shell and damage it. Sometimes the terrapins are able to still survive and can mend their own shell. Other times, unfortunately, it's fatal and causes internal bleeding. So in the back bays, as many of you know, if you're from around here, everybody likes to boat in the back bays. And while we see a lot of inboards, which is jet skis and other types of boats, most of them are outboards. And these propellers can be really damaging to the terrapin shells. Also, while it's not common anymore, terrapins were used in stew as a terrapin stew. Some of you might know turtle soup right now. It's still somewhat popular in the Chesapeake area and around here. But in the early 1900s and late 1800s, terrapins were used for soup. And once Prohibition hit, they also kind of went down because sherry is used in terrapin soup. So fortunately, Prohibition kind of helped them. Also, the numbers had dwindled so much from being over harvested that there really wasn't many terrapins left. Like I said, fortunately today they're protected in all the states, so you cannot make terrapin stew in this country at least. Other countries and Asian countries still tend to use terrapins and other types of turtles for different stews. You will see snapper soup on some restaurants around here. And while I like snappers, at least they're not endangered or threatened. Okay. Another really big issue around here is what's called ghost pots or ghost nets or ghost crab pots. And what these are is commercial fishermen are required to use what's called a bycatch reduction device, but personal fishermen and personal crabbers are allowed to just kind of bypass that. So when you put a crab pot down in the marsh area and you put your bait in there and you're trying to collect either blue crabs or other types of crabs there, unfortunately what happens is terrapins get stuck in them and sometimes they get abandoned. So sometimes people forget where they were, or if there's a bad storm, they might become dislodged from the buoy or the marker. And then they just kind of sit out there constantly collecting terrapins, which then drown. So we find tons and tons of these abandoned pots that have hundreds sometimes of terrapins in them that drown. And who knows how long they were sitting out there and accumulating them. So any type of crabbing should have what's called a bycatch reduction device, which is a plastic piece that goes on the outside of the crab trap. And it's big enough to allow terrapins to go in and out, but not the crabs. And there's a lot of organizations, including Stockton, that's really big on trying to remove these ghost traps from the Back Bay areas. So other problems, the one that we focus on at the Margate Terrapin Rescue Project is roads. So as I said, these terrapins, when they are nesting, they are on a one-track mind to find the best spot to nest, and it doesn't matter where it is. So they're crossing roadways left and right in the salt marsh areas. And if you've ever gone to the beach, you go over these salt marsh areas. And sometimes the causeways are a little bit higher and the terrapins can't get on. But a lot of times they're almost at the same level as the salt marsh around it. So these terrapins come on looking for the perfect nesting areas and unfortunately get hit by cars. Also, another problem is predators. So I said that yes, some of these terrapins are part of the food web and are important to provide for others. However, they are becoming more and more disproportionately preyed on by things such as raccoons and crows and ospreys and fox, and even big rats will eat the eggs and the babies. And this is also because the habitat which these creatures used to be in is no longer there. So they're being forced out of their normal areas and looking for food, and they find food along these salt marsh areas where the terrapins are nesting. Another big area on all the another big issue on all the barrier islands is just development and habitat destruction. And you can also see bulkhead on the left-hand side. So these bulkheads prevent terrapins from getting on the barrier islands. And the barrier islands on the back end were historically where terrapins used to nest. They would come up and lay their eggs there. It was nice and sandy because you had the overwash from the ocean, and it was a perfect area. However, now it's all built up, so there's nowhere for them to go. So they're forced onto these less than ideal areas, such as the roadways. And last, plastic and trash and just everything that's in the water now. These cause a serious issue to terrapins and all wildlife, just because they mistake it for food or they get stuck in it, like these rings from sodas. And there's a big issue with microplastics, which is starting to come around. These little tiny pieces of plastic that are ingested and they get lodged in these organism stomachs and actually will lead to them dying later on. So there's quite a bit of problems out there for terrapins, facing everything from predators to boating to just trash. So it's a little bit overwhelming, but fortunately, there's a lot of groups such as ours that are working to kind of help this. So we are a grassroots organization, and that basically means that it started with a bunch of concerned citizens that were like, hey, you know, there's something going on. All these turtles are dead on the road, and nobody likes to see dead turtles. So what can we do to help? And so a bunch of local citizens kind of got together and started patrolling along the Margate Causeway. And along with this, they decided to start putting in different types of barriers to help prevent the terrapins from crossing the roads. And that's kind of been trending and going on for almost 20 years now to some regard. And in the last 6-7 years, we've kind of increased a lot of our patrolling and a lot of our outreach and getting all the citizens in the area kind of involved more. So these barriers work to prevent the terrapins from crossing the roadways. And some people will think that, well, isn't this falsely, you know, altering their path? Fortunately, along at least the Margate Causeway, there's a lot of bridges in between. So if a terrapin's really determined to get to the other side, they will go along the entire barrier, kind of get annoyed, go back into the water and swim around to the other side. So we're not essentially preventing them successfully nesting. And also what we started doing is data collection and research with our citizen science program. And our citizen science program gets everybody involved. So we have tons of families that get involved. We have people that are just looking to do something extra. We have college students, we have high school students. So we have everybody from all backgrounds helping out. So if you're not familiar with the area, our focus area is on the Margate Causeway, which is also the Down Beach Express toll. It starts in Northfield and ends up in Margate, and it crosses through, you can see all this prime marsh here. We divide all the sections, which is in between the bridges, and that's how we patrol, is based on these different sections. And it's about 3 miles long, and we have fencing on both sides for almost all of it. And then if you ever drive across, not even the Margate Causeway, but if you're down in Stone Harbor or you're up in Tuckerton and going through 7 Bridges, you might see this black tubing. And everybody usually thinks, oh, it's nothing, it's utility tubing or stormwater tubing. But this tubing is actually helping stop the terrapins from crossing the road. This has kind of been designed over the years through the Conserve Wildlife Foundation. They came up with different prototypes and ideas on how to use this. And we found that the one on the right-hand side here, you can see, it's a 10-inch tube that's cut in half. And then we trench it into the ground. So it's concave and it kind of acts as like a funnel. So the terrapins come up to it, realize they can't get over it, they can't dig underneath of it, and they either go around and find a nesting area there, or they'll go back into the water and go to another side or another area to nest. So this has been pretty effective, and this is what we've been kind of using for the last few years. We do have some of this whole tubing still available, just because it's working somewhat and it's really expensive to replace. So we kind of have a little bit combination of both. So some of the data that we've been collecting, if anybody is a data person, we have some rudimentary data going back to 1995. But you can see there's kind of been a downward trend in our fatalities, which is good. Last year, we unfortunately had a very high fatality year. I want to attribute it to because we had a lot of volunteers out there, and we also had quite a bit more traffic coming down, just because everybody was staying a little bit more local. So we had a lot of fatalities last year. We're hoping to get that number back down. But on a more positive note, we've had way more saves and rescues. We also keep track of how many terrapins have been saved and helped across the roads. So you can see we've been really going upward in how many we've saved every year. This last year being our highest year ever with over 100 saves. Okay, so what do you do if you actually see a terrapin on the roadway? If you see them in the roadway, it's sometimes hard if you're speeding. So we recommend driving slowly during the nesting season on all salt marsh roads. If you see them in the road, safely pull over to the side, and you can pick them up either from behind or on the sides of their shells, but never grab them by their tail. So their tail is a part of them. It would be very painful. You can break their tail. So you want to make sure you grab onto the sides of the shell, or if you're more comfortable, from behind. Sometimes you can do one on the side and one underneath to kind of support them. But you want to make sure that you're always putting a terrapin in the direction it was going, not from where it came from. This is because a terrapin, like I said, has that one-track mind. She's trying to find the perfect nesting area. So if she's going this direction and you pick her up and put her back on the other side, she's going to turn right around and go back across again. So if you see this, you pick her up and you put her in the direction she was heading, not from where she was going. And a lot of people are concerned, is it safe to pick up a terrapin? Yes, it is safe to pick up a terrapin. You can pick them up, like I said, on the sides or from behind. Do not put your fingers in front of their face. While they are not generally aggressive, just like any other animal, if they get agitated, they will bite. And terrapins have really, really strong jaws and can definitely break a finger. So do not put your finger in front of them. But terrapins tend to be pretty docile and more scared of you. So when you pick them up, they're going to try to, just hang out there and not really want to be bothered. So other than helping them across the roadways, if you see them, how else can you help? So we have what's called our annual barrier installation and repair day. And this will be coming up in the middle of May. And what we do is we go along the entirety of the roadway, fixing the barriers and replacing spots that maybe are missing or broken. It's a lot of manual labor, but it's really important because these barriers are our best defense against them getting hit by cars. On that day also, we have plenty of kids come out and they do a salt marsh cleanup. So we pick up any trash that's along the marsh, that's on the grass there. And this is also obviously important because sometimes these terrapins will mistake some of that for food. Another big effort that we have is our daily patrols on the Margate Causeway. So during the nesting season, we have at least one person a day going out on the Margate Causeway and checking for any terrapins that have crossed, or like any that are crossing to help them across, or unfortunately ones that have been hit that either are injured and we can save, or ones that are just deceased and we just take the data on them. So this is usually done. We'll have at least 1 to 2 people a day, sometimes in the morning and afternoon, or morning and evening going out. So we always have availability for patrolling, and that's always a big effort. The more people out there that can save these terrapins, the better. Nest surveys. So when we find a terrapin that's been nesting, we put a predator exclusion device over top. And this is to keep out predators, but also for us to monitor the nest. So after the nesting season is completed, we will monitor these nests to see if any hatchlings come out. Also, transporting injured terrapins and eggs. So sometimes a volunteer will be patrolling and find an injured terrapin, or maybe find their eggs that's not covered, or there's eggs on the roadway. And we will try to take those to a rehabilitator. Unfortunately, the rehabilitators aren't always the closest, and the volunteer that's patrolling might need to finish the patrol. So having people that are available either by text or email that can quick come over, pick up the terrapin and take them to the rehabilitator is really important. Lastly, we're starting a t-shirt fundraiser after this presentation actually tonight. So donations from all the t-shirts will go to purchasing more of these barriers and also purchasing all the materials to install these barriers. So if you can't physically help us, which I know a lot of people cannot, donations are always greatly accepted and greatly appreciated. And now we have a t-shirt fundraiser, so you get a t-shirt too. So check out our t-shirts later. They'll be on our Facebook and our Instagram. That's mostly where we do a lot of our communication. And also you can get on our email list as well. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of our volunteers. These are over the past few years. A lot of these are returning volunteers. So Denise, who's on our top left-hand side, Delaney, who's right underneath of her, Steph, who's on the bottom right, and Janine, who's in the top middle-ish. They've been volunteers with us for at least 5 or 6 years now. And they are standout. They save tons of terrapins. They're really dedicated. But you can see they're all different ages. So it doesn't matter if you're younger, as long as you're with an adult, or if you're older and you just are retired and you want to go out and check for terrapins. So everybody can help out in any way. And the way we do it is we do an orientation and you come out and we kind of go over everything you need to know. There's a really easy app that we have that we use to track all the data and make sure we're capturing everything, because all this data that we collect is really important because we send it to the state, who's collaborating all of our data from up and down the coast, and trying to get a good idea of the population that terrapins have all up and down New Jersey, to kind of give it a little bit more backing when we want to put them as endangered or threatened. So if you're interested in that, like I said, you can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on Instagram, or you can get on our email list, which sends out a bunch of information coming up. So that's all I have. And I want to thank ACUA for hosting this virtual month and asking us to join. We're very excited, and getting out the word is really important. So if you see a terrapin, you see somebody that maybe doesn't know what to do, now you know what to do and you can tell them. And it kind of, goes down the lane and everybody around the area starts to know more and more that these terrapins are really important and they're not just an ordinary turtle on the road. So again, yeah, you can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram. We have our website there as well. And we're also on Twitter at Margate Terrapin. So if anybody has any questions, I didn't see any in the panel, but if you want to raise a hand or ask a question or type it, you're more than welcome to. I see a couple of my volunteers on here that have been volunteers in the past that are joining us. Yeah, thank you for coming out, everybody.
Thank you so much. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I went to Stockton. I graduated with environmental science degree, and I went on to finish my master's in conservation biology. And I work full-time at the FAA Technical Center as an environmental protection specialist. And I do this as my volunteer side. So I run this organization. I started it during my thesis, started getting involved with it during my thesis, working with the group that was already there. And the guy that was organizing it unfortunately moved and kind of gave it all to me. So I've been working with this organization since then. But yeah, my thesis was based on this. So I'm very invested in it. And I became just very passionate about terrapins, and I love to get everybody involved. So.
Great, well, thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your virtual hand or leave a question or comment in the chat below.
If not, that just means I did a very thorough presentation. I covered all the bases.
I learned so much.
Yeah. And like I said, we'll be having our installation day coming up. Oh, yeah, how do we sign up? So we will have an event on Facebook. And also, if you're interested, we've been getting a bunch of emails too. And we will send out information on the dates and what you'll need for the installation day, installation and repair day. What kind of tools you'll need if you have any, and a waiver and everything will be included in that. So if you want to sign up for it, follow us on Facebook and look out for the dates, or you can send us an email and we'll just send a direct information to you as well. And yep, the recording is available at acua.com/Earth Month if you want to see their full recording of this.
Okay, I see a question that came in. If the temperature influences the sex of the turtle eggs, does that mean if it's a cold year, if there are only males?
Yes, so the colder the year, the colder the season and the summer we have, we will tend to get more males than females. The nests are pretty shallow, so they're only about 5 to 6 inches below the ground. So unlike, other things where we think of the ground temperature staying pretty stable at 50, 55, because these are so shallow, they are very easily influenced by the air temperature. So when we have a cooler month, that's definitely a thing where we'll have more males than females. Any other questions? Do mommy turtles sit on the nest? No. So unlike birds, perhaps, where you sit and warm the eggs until they're born, female terrapins, after they lay their eggs, they will cover them up completely with their hind legs. And they're very camouflaged. They're very difficult to find unless you know what to look for. And then they leave. They leave their terrapin babies behind. And they kind of let them fend for themselves. But they'll probably see them in the marsh because, like I said, the terrapins don't go very far. They tend to stay in the same area. So they'll all probably meet up out in the water again. How can you tell if a baby terrapin is a male or female? So when they're babies, it's very difficult to tell. When they're adults, it's a little bit easier other than size. One thing is their head size. So a female's head tends to be wider and flatter, whereas a male's head tends to be skinnier. That's one way to tell. Another way, obviously, is the size, but a last way is they have something called a cloaca underneath the bottom of their tail. And the cloaca is like a catch-all. It's where their waist goes and everything. And if that opening is closer to the shell, that means it's female. If it's further away from the shell, that means it's a male. However, in baby terrapins, sometimes it's really difficult because they haven't reached full size or full maturity, and that distance of the cloaca can still change. So yeah, terrapin babies are very difficult to tell male versus female. DDT affected the shells. So there has been some studies of DDT in terrapin shells, more so other types of turtles. But unlike birds, where birds are a little bit higher up on the food chain, so it accumulates in their bodies and accumulates in their eggs, terrapins tend to be a little bit on the lower side. They're only generally feeding on snails and crabs and stuff of that nature, which hasn't a bioaccumulated DDT as much as something like a bird. Especially, I know the biggest one must be Stockton. Yeah, Stockton students. Yeah, we know about the ospreys very well. The ospreys and the DDT. Also, obviously, other types of birds of prey is a big DDT accumulator. So anything that's high up on the food chain tends to accumulate more in their eggs and their offspring versus something a little bit lower like a terrapin. Okay. Any other questions? Those are good questions, really good questions. All right. Doesn't look like anybody else, but again, thank you everybody for attending tonight. I know you're all probably pretty hungry. It's dinner time, so you can go and eat, but don't eat turtle soup. That's what I advise against. Anything else would be fine. So again, check us out, Facebook, Instagram, our website has a lot of information about our data and how to get involved, and also on Twitter as well. And I hope to see you guys out there, and hopefully we'll have some more volunteers this year. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.